Why can't I copy this link? It's kind of working. All right. 30 million shares of GameStop. That's interesting. Why are you so negative? So negative. 30 million shares of GameStop. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much, but... Hey, good morning. Good morning. Go to the Mardigan. Here you go. Wow. Man, GME's already opening overbought. That's kind of silly. So IWM, big gap up today. Two and some change percent. So it's going to be an interesting one for sure. Well, I gotta say, if this is just some kind of latent reaction, we could still see 215 on IWM before we gap fill, but it's a pretty huge gap, so we'll see. Normally, this kind of stuff you don't really get away with it unless it's like a really high volume gap. So we'll see. I'm more curious, obviously, about how that impacts AMC GME kind of stuff. So yesterday, what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, during after hours, I was kind of watching to see where we went, and we went to that 509, and I mentioned that I don't really feel like that is a good indication of anything unless you've got high volume. And I still don't really feel like it was the strongest after hours session. I mean, it was kind of like really low volume altogether. So I'm not gonna hold my breath this morning because those hits on 509 are great as a potential for support. If this were like a normal range and I didn't know anything else about what was going on, and I just saw that particular hit, I would think that this could be like a double bottom followed by a, right now it looks like a double top, but I would think it could be like a potentially not bad, I suppose. But given that we didn't hit that in regular trading hours, that's kind of like the first stop today. I would love to go back down. I would really like to see it go back down to 509 or even a little bit lower and hit that first. I know that we always talk about possibility versus probability, and it's always possible it doesn't do that. You can have a run without a check, but I would much rather check it and just get that over with this morning. So, it's kind of funny how this YouTube stuff doesn't seem to want to work on really specific days. I guess I'll just quit Discord for a bit. There we go. So most of the headlines that I saw were inflation points to confirm rate cuts. So, you know, like I still don't really understand why yesterday we didn't kind of do anything. Um, Maybe it just wasn't ready to go. Maybe there was another reason I don't know. I don't know about. But I saw the headlines this morning and it was all kind of the same. It was like, yep, looks like rate cuts are coming. That seems really likely now. It's like, yeah. I mean, we knew that yesterday when the inflation data printed, but it didn't move. It was very odd. So breakout target for this was 215. I'm not really gonna mince words about it with the gap and everything. Just kind of have to wait. I don't really think there's any reason to overthink it. It's a gap, so it's very likely it comes back to fill it. But I do think it's possible that we go ahead and hit 215 first. And that to me is pretty bullish because, again, this is like that supply zone. I know it's going to sound weird, but I still think we haven't actually checked it. We're like circumventing it. It's like we're not going into it. It's really bizarre. We're going like around it, you know? And this is the second time or the third time this has happened. 1, 2, 3. And there's just not really been any strong indication that, and you might argue here it was bought through, but there's not really a strong indication that there's any supports that have actually been grabbed here, except maybe this guy right here at 209 or 210, I guess, 209.99. That's where it like took off for the second time. So that might be this one. I don't even know. So it's very odd to me. So this setup has yet to. It's like, dang it, Booksy, can't you just be happy? Can't you just be happy? I'm not happy. I'm happy that it's gone up again. I'm happy it broke to the upside this time. I'm happy. I am. I actually looked at the chart and I thought, well, that's good because we wanted it to go up, not down. I mean, that's obvious because this is kind of a breakdown would be pretty bad, just like the last time. And you could argue that breakout made more sense for a lot of reasons, not just because of the news. And I was already kind of arguing that we might get up to 215, 212, 215 back here, when we first came down. But all of that's fine, right? You can say all that's good. In the grand scheme of things, though, there's still a couple things here that are missing. So like, I don't really want to get too much into like RSI and junk right now. It's going to be up and down over the next few days anyways. I don't expect it to just continue. That'd be cool, but again, I don't really expect that. And I don't really want it to go without checking, so maybe it wouldn't be cool. But it's still odd to me. Like there's still no back test on this area. You see how we just like dipped through it? We stayed underneath it and then we're jumping above it. And I'm like sitting here like scratching my head like, well, I guess if the operator is going to do something like they did over here, which is kind of like to stall everything, you might just see what we originally thought when I was like first drawing this out and I had it coming up to maybe 220. This was before I had any kind of, I think I had something like this on the chart. Probably, this is probably what it looked like back then. Because I was thinking like it's going to come up and top and then come back down and bottom here. So before we broke out in July, this is kind of what I was thinking would maybe happen. It's not that far off. It's just way more extreme. I mean, obviously it went way higher and it went lower. Not way higher, but it went higher and then it also went lower. So the middle ground, though, the reason I had picked this area was because of the top, because it was like the top of and you're like, well, it's going to come back, right? It's got to come back and you're going to see buyers turn this into a demand zone. And instead, we're just kind of like jumping around it, playing leapfrog. Like, I don't know why. I just think that's really odd. So if you're somebody that's like bullish on the market right now, I never can tell you what to do with your money. I can't tell you whether to buy or sell or anything. But I will say this: if you're somebody that's bullish on the market right now, and this is me, because like I haven't actually gotten back into IWM, and you're like, why not? I thought you had these great targets. Because a lot of my liquidity is tied up right now in like AMC and GME and stuff. I mean, that's all there is to it. But if I'm gonna get back into IWM, it's gonna be like once it kind of builds out some kind of support here, I'd have to see. I think what would be maybe more comforting to me would be to see some kind of a range build out here. And I'm looking at it like wondering if that's even realistic now, because I'm like, well, the way this thing formed, it kind of formed like a bottom here, and I don't know. You know, is it gonna chop, or what? So something along the lines of, and I'm just gonna put it over to the side so you can see it. Something along the lines of this, honestly, would be kind of ideal to me. Like that, and then coming back up, and then jumping this range, and coming back up, and then SOSing here. Like that kind of a move would look the best to me. So just in terms of like where are the supports, where would I want to hit, what would I want to check before coming back out, it probably wouldn't be that dramatic, but it'd be something like this. Because this has to be demand, this has to be demand, and then this has to be demand. So there's like key levels here that I feel like we're not really like meeting some really basic criteria for a run up at this point. And I don't know what else to say about it other than we just gotta wait. So I'm excited to see what AMC does with this move here. And if the market rallies a bit, maybe this is all we need to get us started on AMC and GME. Kickstart it finally. Yesterday, at the very end of the day, I tend to try to recap this because are you guys, let me ask real quick before we go forward. Are y'all seeing a decent stream, or is it like really jittery and crappy with like gaps in the volume and all that stuff? Like my indicator thing says it's going crazy, but the little widget on YouTube. Okay, yeah, that's weird, because like the widget on YouTube keeps giving me an error, but I'm looking at OBS, which is the streaming software I use, and it's fine. It's like pumping green, so I don't really understand where the activity is. It might just be YouTube, I guess, like on their end. I mean, it's not impossible. It's not me, it's you. It's not me, it's YouTube. Yeah, it really doesn't look like it's me, so that's why I'm asking. Slightly glitchy? Okay. I mean, somewhere in this, there must be a kink, because it's telling me there's a kink, but I'm not seeing it, so I'm kind of confused. All right, so we did get a backup very, very briefly to 510. Okay, Booksy. How important is it to get back down to like 509 to 507? How important is that really? How important is it to get back down 509 to 507? Is it important enough that you're willing to call it out and say that it needs to do this? Or is it just a formality? Is 510 enough? Does it feel like enough? This closed at 510. This closed at 510. This closed at 509. This closed at 509. This closed at 510. This closed at 509. This low was 510. This low was 510. Closed at 510. Opened at 510. Closed at 507. I'm reading candles from the tops. High of 511. Where did it opened at 511? Closed at 510. Opened at 510. High at 510. Opened at 510. Low 510. High of 510. Opened at 510. Okay. That was a little weird, but I think if 510 were to hold, I wouldn't hold my breath for 508, 509. So I just convinced myself of that, because the reason I looked at 508 and 509 were these lower hits here, and that whole area looks like it's been acting as sort of a supply-demand battle. And specifically, I think what it is that it's a 2-cent wrap of 510. So like there's a little 2-cent region from 508. It's a very tight area, I know. But from 508 to 512, that's where the majority of this trading has happened. And I'm betting that if we put on the VRVP, we'll probably see that on that top here. There's a little shelf region here. So it's not that it's the highest liquidity. It's not. The highest liquidity is more like 504. And frankly, if we came to 504, I wouldn't bat an eye either, because we'd be outside the creek, but we would be retesting them all down here. I just wouldn't like that drop through here again. But I suppose it wouldn't be the end of the world, you know? That's been the high liquidity. Who knew, right? Of course, we all knew that 504 was it, because it's been like banging around 504 for 2 weeks. But I think if 510 were to hold, I probably wouldn't worry too much. There's two shelves here. So again, one's at like 508, the other is at like 512. And I can see it on the VRVP. There's a little horn and horn. You can see like the two higher liquidity spots if you're looking at my screen. And that makes sense because 510 seems to be the main the main wall, if you want to say that. So like we have gotten above it and tried to hold it at different times. Like right here, this whole candle is above it, but then the next candle is like a wick below and then right on it. I mean, it's just kind of the same story over and over again. So there's a lot more candle bodies that end on it than wicks, I would say, but it's fairly concise. So I think it's like a mid ground for that area. So it looks like we're sharing in none of the upside, and we're just going to share in like the downside this morning for IWM. So we weren't moving when IWM was pumping in pre-market or whatever. And then early in the morning when it pushed up a little higher, we didn't really move anywhere. We went up like a penny. Now that it's going down, AMC's going right along with it. So I think it's going to try again here to establish 510 as a support. There's clearly another wall, 513. So there's definitely like a wall there too. It's a lot of numbers, I know. It's kind of been the same story though for the last 2 weeks, so it's not that unusual here. So do I think that it matters? Like, does it super important that it goes back down low? No. I don't think that's super important, but it would be a better check. So like at this point, as the crow flies, if we just drop straight through, it would be like 506 or 507, and that would be okay. That'd actually probably be pretty bullish to me. Because if you can breach above here and hold that support and then push again, you don't have to worry about, what about that back test? What about that back test? What about that back test? Nope, it's already happened, right? On the other hand, if you slide through again, then it's a very, very bearish signal. I hate to say that, but I think at this point, we're continually trying to like breach the walls and failing to do so, and like continually sliding back beneath the creek with major volume on those up thrusts, and then the sell throughs would not be bullish just in and of itself. Said the same thing yesterday when we slid back early in the morning. I said, yeah, if it slides back down, it's going to keep going for a bit, and it didn't. So there's that. It's not very complicated. It's just a on the day kind of price action. So I got to be straightforward with you guys. If it's going to do that again today, I'm not going to watch the chart, because it's not about, for me, it's not about being right or wrong at this point. It's about kind of spending my time doing something that I don't really want to spend my time doing. Like, I don't want to just spend my time watching it bounce around like a few pennies again today. So if it's going to do that, it's not because I'm suddenly super bearish or something, or I don't love AMC, or you know what I mean? Like, people say whatever they want to say, but it's really just because I don't want to watch it. Like, I've got other things I got to do. So if we end up in a stalemate again this morning, I'm not going to watch the chart today. I'm just telling you straight up so you all know first thing in the morning that that's my plan, because I got lots of stuff I need to get done, and I spent a whole day, yesterday and the day before waiting for something good, and of course it's going to be the moment that I turn it off, it's going to go flying or something, but that's just the way of life, I guess. Hang on, one of my cats is flipping out. I don't know why you're crying at that door, but no one is there. Hey, no one is there, so stop. You're not getting into this room, so stop. All right, I can appreciate my cat's feelings about whatever he's feeling, but I don't know what he's doing. He was just screaming at a door. I think he thinks somebody's in there, but nobody's in there. All right, same deal as GME. Looks a little bit like another distribution motion. So, I mean, it is what it is, guys. Like, it's doing the same thing it did over here. It's almost identical. Maybe there's something to talk about with an iterative movement. I don't really know. 1, 2, and then a push. 1, 2, and then a push. But even if that's the case, like, it would be iterating still until it's not. So it's the same motion. So we'll see. I guess the big difference, and maybe the way that you would want to look at this, is what happened after the push. Because this definitely comes back down and bleeds through the creek and then bleeds through the floor. Oh wow, it's a decline. So it looks like we're just getting all of the lemon and none of the sugar here this morning. Come on. Yeah, so 22 was a pretty key level for AMC, but the bigger one was 22.32, and that's all I'm seeing right here. Is I can't see anything else right now. Sorry. This is a double rejection right now on a uptrend here that we lost. And you can see it right here coming back to August 7th bottom, August 12th bottom. I'm looking at GME right now. And going through that cross, and then it's right on the money. It's right where it needs to be, but it needs to break. So yeah, either we're gonna get a second attempt, or this is just kind of a rinse repeat from yesterday, and this is just a big fat cat here. You're getting a widening in the middle and then a narrowing. So it's like narrow, and then it gets wider, and then it narrows, and then it does the same thing. And I'm seeing on RSI, it kind of just looks like a double top motion. and this one's rejecting a little lower. So if I were to guess, and I'm thinking this is just throwing this out there because I feel like this might be right. If I were to guess, I would say that this is actually iterative, as I say. That the motion itself is meant to be like a rinse repeat. And I think what we're going to see, if I'm right about that, is that we would see it kind of try to do the same thing until it can't. So if the goal here is to drive the price back down in a similar pattern, you might see it come back below. Like, he come pretty far. I got to be careful about this part. See, I don't think I would include this necessarily. I did at first, but I don't think I would. I'm getting really tired of this garbage. It's just you, isn't it? It's just you. Got ourselves a troublemaker this morning. One of my cats is just starting fights and screaming. I don't know. Maybe he didn't get enough pets this morning. This is a well, I'm reading through what David's saying here. I know. I understand that it would be really annoying if I left and then it started running. But if that happens, I can get back on. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal. Today it's fine. I'm not going to be out and about. I just need... Yesterday I was doing a lot out and about during my lunch. But I need to do some other stuff. So I'm working on another project that I've been working on for a long time, and it's important to me that I need to get some work done on it today. And I just feel like there's a yeah, I think it wasn't even really like a bad attitude necessarily yesterday. I just felt like I think I'm getting kind of tired of the sideways, and sometimes like it's better for me to just disconnect for a minute than to keep trying to like push forward if I'm getting like quietly getting like stressed about something. It's not really that I'm like hyper stressed about it. I'm just telling you guys, that's how I feel about it. And I know myself, it would be better for me to just take a break if that's what happens today. Cuz I'll start getting like more irritated or irritable, it's probably the right word. So that's interesting. Sorry, I just got messaged by a former client who was a kind of a big deal client. I mean, that's the way I saw it anyways. I don't know if he really is, but yeah, I look at MPW sometimes because it's something I'm invested in, but also because I like having like another chart. I know it sounds weird, but I feel comforted knowing it's a different sector. It's like real estate investments, and I get to see what that's doing in relationship to all the news and junk. And so I'm not against looking at other tickers. It's just this one's always on my docket, so I'm always looking at it. This is interesting too. It's the same kind of motion. You know, I was thinking it looked kind of odd to me because it was like setting up almost inverted. And I was like, well, it could be. That's just support. I've been talking about this entry support for quite a while, really, we kind of, I guess I would say we kind of identified it back here when we broke down, because I went back and I looked at why did we come to this level and then have that massive drop. And it was just a matter of, it's where we entered this bottom area on this massive structure. And it's a massive structure. It's huge. It's not small. So I looked back, and the very first place it touched when it came down, the first place it got support was 467, which is an odd number. I mean, that's not a very like normal sounding number, but so it ended up acting as a, way back over here. This is October of 2023. It ended up acting as the first hit, the first support on the main sell through. Now there were others, and clearly like we've gone back and tested a lot of those here. I mean, that's what a lot of this is. We went back to near that $4 area. We've been chopping around the 440s lately right here. That's all of that is this bottom. You see that? So like succinctly, you would say if this finds support here, it's going to go all the way back up to, this is interesting to me because if I'm looking at this like a range, I would think that, oh, if it finds support here, it's already traded a lot of this over time. It probably would go ahead and travel back to the top at like 550s. And then interestingly, this is a potential diamond, and that diamond target breakout is 550s. Like it's really, really succinct. So it's a very simple, and now a throwback here going back down could change that, but it's a very simple like setup in some regards. It's like it's got a price target that reaches the previous top like of that range, and that would make sense. There's two gaps here, one's at 520, one's at 550. So it may not be your cup of tea, but I would say if it manages to break out of this this lower kind of diamond that it's in, I could probably clean this up. Which, if you're just trying to keep it simple, would be support above 485. I know it's a really bizarre that it's like the same numbers as AMC, but it just is. Kind of looks like this too might be a big part of it, so I'll leave that one there. If it manages to break above 45, I'd say there's a strong chance that it's going to just go. But if you had to wait, I would say, yeah, 485, and then I think that's probably it. It might be a really good swing trade for some. If you want to consider it, you could set an alert, because it's a decent 15% trade with no options, you know. That's pretty solid. I can't guarantee anything in the market, but it's a simple enough measurement. It's not like a complicated, this is just a really simple widening and then narrowing. So if it breaks out, that's the target, and it makes sense because of the previous levels. So I've been waiting to see if it can get back above that 467. I was not convinced it was going to stay there because there's a gap at 450. So part of me was like, why is there a gap down here? Like, are they trying to go backwards to get to that gap? And I thought maybe they would here, drop back down, but because it was a support coming down right around 450. So it's not, it's like IWM and stuff. It's like it could come back low and you could see this retracement. I wouldn't be at all surprised if like it just did that really fast today or even tomorrow. But hey, 509. Whoop whoop. Yeah, some of y'all just ducked. You were like, oh, it's the police. Don't whoop whoop, Booksy. Whoop whoop. Some of y'all were like, oh, what? It's the popo coming to get me. Don't worry, man. Some of you guys are like, dude, you're not that guy from Police Academy. The guy that can actually make sound effects. Could you do TA on TLRY if we get chopped today? Yeah, I mean, we're kind of chopping right now. It might not be a bad time to look at something else. I don't know what to to say other than we've got a pretty sizable gap on IWM. So if it doesn't kind of immediately find some support here, it'd probably be at 210.08 because that's where the is that the same number? No. I was like going to move it over. It's probably right around here. Could be down to 209. But this is an area you could find support above, and if you did, you may not fill that gap today. You may go ahead and head up. But then I was really waiting for 509, and I really wanted that back up. I'm liking that the volume dropped off to like nothing here. So let's hopefully, fingers crossed, that stays the same. This is looking pretty positive to me. Not thrilled that it dropped this particular creek, because that's like a major hook, and you can see it on the chart, like why I would think that. It's a pretty massive uptrend here. So if this is like a reversal out of a rising, I mean, it's kind of funny because we talk about these structures, they're all kind of been the same lately. A lot of them have been like this, probably because of the small cap index doing this. It's definitely like a rising triangle, and ascending triangles can have pretty decent breakouts. I think we looked at that the other day, and it's essentially like a 786 or it's like a 70% break. So that's not huge, maybe for some. I think that it just depends on how you measure this. I'm going to be very like conservative and measure from here, not from here. So that would significantly change your measurements perhaps. But let me just do this. Put it over to the side for a second. So about 70%, you can just eyeball it. It doesn't really have to be perfect if you're just trying to guess. Get a good estimation on it. That's about the breakout target right there. And I'll just take that over here. Now I do this on logarithmic a lot. I don't know if this works as efficiently on, so here's what I'm trying to say. On logarithmic, it's more percentage based in terms of how the chart is scaled. So when you create a box and you move it around, that percentage should remain the same. But like, I don't know for a fact that happens to be, I think it would be the same on, I would think it would be the same on linear, just thinking about it, but I don't know why I wanted to say that, but I just wanted to make sure you guys are aware that I know that it works on logarithmic. I would have to check it on linear. Probably works. Like in my brain, I'm like, why would that not work? Why are you saying it wouldn't work? It should work. Yeah, probably. Yep. There's your target. It's really close to our other target, 560s. Yep. What if you measure the whole thing instead of doing the half thing? That's a good one. Let's try that. It's probably going to be like an average of the two. I'm measuring up to near that wick, but we can do it either way. We're just estimating stuff anyways. It doesn't have to be like perfect. I guess the point being that the targets are really good. Hey! Take that, haters. Oh, man. I got a comment. You guys are like, don't do it, Booksy. Don't do it. Don't read the comments. All right, I won't do it. I'll be the bigger man this morning. All right, so if you look at the average of these two breakout targets that I got, I just did different measurements because one was like hyper conservative. It's based on the support. One's based on the full length of the ascending triangle. If this ascending triangle were to reverse and break to the upside here, it could be really strong. It actually could be stronger than these targets because technically like a drop and then a reversal could be, a double flush could be even stronger. But just conservatively, like, where are those targets? Those are the two targets. One's at 560, the other's at 570, maybe 576. If you average the two, you get 567, which is our target. You guys are like, Booksy, how can we trust that you're not some evil mastermind who just goes and does this stuff beforehand and then makes your charts look like... I don't do that. I mean, that's the thing, is like, I'm looking at it right now. I'm staring at this chart right now. You're seeing me do everything live. I really don't chart that much off this stream anymore. I mean, there's not enough time in my day to sit here and do it again. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'll do a little bit, but you're seeing me do it live. I mean, you've seen me do the S-curve target. You've seen me do the waveform. You saw me measure it out on stream. You know, it's... in some ways, it's probably not that complicated. If you have an S-curve, it might have something that appears to be... like, it just happened on MPW. Like, there was one here that was like a rising, ascending triangle, you know, and then there's another triangle on the other side. But, I mean, those kinds of things are there all the time. And those targets might already be met, you know, for some of these other stocks. For AMC, it's not met because it never broke out. So it's still just sitting here not doing anything. It would have to get above like that 516 area with some support in order to see that happen. So I can move this up a little bit just so you can see it. It'd have to be up here to see that happen. And then there's the argument that I've been making over the last couple of days with myself, pretty much just talking to myself about what do I think about the nature of these intersects? Are they meant to be representative of price targets? Or are they meant to be representative of pivot points? And I think it's a big debate that I'm having right now because I want to get it right. And I started noticing that a lot of the ones that I was pointing out were pivots. They weren't actually targets. Leave already so I can run. Yeah, I know, right? So, I'm not really, like when I do those targets in the back of my mind, I don't know what it is. I guess it's a math brain or spatial thinking or something, but I'm already kind of assuming it's going to work just by the nature of the way mathematics is and how I think these measurements are statistically obtained. It makes sense to me. So, yeah. So we'll see, you know. I think that what this tells me right now is that this is still a high probability target, like the 560s. And even though we're not happy it hasn't been moving, this definitely to me appears to be, it's just kind of a now or never type thing. This is the end of the structure anyways. The way I've got it drawn out, it ends today, so it'd be by noon. And then the pivot that I've got, or the marker that I've got is here on the, you know, at 1040 or whatever. So that'd be 30 minutes from now. You guys are like, it ain't running that high in 30 minutes, Booksy. We've seen crazier things happen. So I don't know. It's a 10% move. It's a big move. We have seen crazier things happen, though. I would be interested to know if it's not the target, if this is where it breaks out or something. That could also be really helpful information. And that's what a lot of what I was doing yesterday, probably felt to a lot of people like noise, because I was doing all this weird stuff with waveforms yesterday. And and that's what I was doing like half the day yesterday. But it's important, I think, because a lot of this stuff, I think, is how we determine, at least how I determine price targets. So I wanted to make sure I'm getting it right. So I'm trying to collect that as evidence so that I can build a stronger here's what we need to look for, and here's what these actually point towards type deal. So I'm seeing a really strong attempt here to try to get back to 567. So we'll just kind of watch it. And frankly, again, that marker's been there, but we've had plenty of these that just kind of flew right by. So I'm not going to hold my breath for it. If it happens, great. Then we did figure it out like a couple days in advance, but it wasn't like the first one that I had. I think this is like the second or the third even recently. I can't get myself involved in this cat drama right now. So you guys behind me, you don't know what's going on, but there are cats and they are fighting and they're going after each other for water, and I do not understand why. Because they have plenty. One of them keeps hissing at the other. One of them was crying at another door, thinking there was somebody else there. And then he started going around chasing the other ones. I'm a crazy cat lady. I just can't get involved. Not my monkey, not my circus. I need to stop getting involved in their drama. I'll just let them fight. Worst thing they could do is kill each other, right? They're not going to do that. Sandy Smith, that's very kind. I don't know if I can say the same right now. So I appreciate that, though. That's a very kind thing to say. Most of these haven't worked, I guess is what I've been saying. And if it does, at the very least, break out here, then I might be okay with that. At least I got something kind of right. If it's going to make the move, I still think that the trajectory would be, I mean, honestly, the trajectory would have to be super steep, because I think that was the wall that I had. But it would be similar regardless to the intro trajectory. So I think we were looking at this as a S-curve when I got that. So, all right. So if I'm wrong about the timing, that's not even the same. So how did I get it? Why does it? Oh, I think because I used that GAN box. I'm trying to figure out why that looks so different. I'll just switch to this one. So you would go from the bottom up here. It's pretty close. It's not that different. I'm not going to beat myself up if it's like an hour off, but if it's days off, that's a little different. And it's kind of like you either didn't see the right thing or you made a pretty big error. And I think that's pretty positive on the whole. I think about, a year ago, maybe more, I probably would have looked at something and said, if it's a week off, you know what I mean? And there are times where I'm like, that is what's happening, it's like way off. But I was like comfortable with like a week off or 2 weeks off. I'm like, that's pretty good. And now I'm like, if it's an hour off, I'm like, no. No. I don't want it to be an hour off. I want it to be minutes off. Yeah, GME is a little more exciting, but I want to see if AMC is going to make the push. So GME already made the push. So I'm going to flip over to GME real quick. It's at 22.43. It looks like it's trying, and there's a lot of volume here in that move. I'm curious about that. So what we were saying about this double up thrust was that it looks exactly the same. But I said we want to see what happens after it pushes up, because this one pushed up and bled right back down through the bottom and the creek. And that's where you would see if there's a similarity or not. So overall, this looks a lot better than what I drew, isn't it? Because it didn't go back through the creek. So the confirmation isn't really like on an iterative kind of move, isn't really that you resign yourself that it's going to definitely do the same thing. Rather, you draw the line and you just wait and see if it's going to do the same thing. If this has started bleeding downward like this one did, we'd be having a different conversation right now. But so far, so good. So we're still in need. I got to tell you though, we're still in need of 2233. It's not enough to just kind of buy up and pump up through here. You got to have that support, and that's the confirmation zone. You know, I don't know where that box went, but I put it up here and now it's gone. I don't know why I do that. Maybe I delete it because it looks noisy or something. But this is like your confirmation zone. So you need to find a support here. I mean, that's the orange line is kind of where I was on the big picture at. I just put it over to the side so you could see it. Yeah, we never got down to that 2169 level. We only ever came down to 2178. And I'm not a huge fan of like the close enough principle, because I feel like if the target is necessary, it's necessary. But I will say that in this case, it may be close enough. And we will find out very soon, because if this distributes again beneath 2239, I would expect it to drop farther. Even though you might say, well, why? Wouldn't it be more bullish because it came up the second time? Yes and no. It's making a lower high if that happens. And then also, you know, again, selling off from that 2230. We just have to wait and see. I think it's very possible it can make a lower low. Not super low. I'm just saying below 2179 if that happened. So here's a summary of that statement, okay? Let me summarize it so I'm not confusing people. So what we saw was an upthrust that looked a lot like what we saw yesterday. This one went above 2233, just like yesterday's did. It didn't go as high. When it sold back down, we went back to look at where it came back to, like where that trend was. Yesterday, it came back to the trend, arguably kind of bled right through it, and then sort of dipped down and started driving lower. And it brought the price back down to a new low locally, you know, range low, if you will. It's possible, you know, if you look at this as like a phase B top, that was like a spring action, and then it crossed the creek, and then this is the retest, and it's driving back up. But I tend to look at things a little more just like visually. And visually speaking, to me, it just looks like a double up thrust, especially if you look at like RSI. It's just kind of up thrust, drop back down, up thrust. So we're at risk here of what's called a UTAD, which is an up thrust after distribution, which would then try to drive the price lower. It'd be like doing like a sideways cat ear where you're like push and then you push again and you chop a bit and then you drop here. I don't want that to happen. That would be a really painful head fake. That being said, the motion this morning wasn't exactly what we would call iterative. It didn't do exactly the same thing. We definitely have a similar setup into that build out. But when it came back down, it went down to 2198, it held support, and then it pushed up again higher. So if it can find support at 2233 and it doesn't form what looks like a distributive top, and you will know because almost all the distributive tops look basically the same. It's either a giant flush, which is just like a UTAD, which is an upthrust after distribution, tends to be a longer winded distribution. Tends to be very like highly volatile, and usually you're going to get something that looks like more like this, where you'll have like a widening of the range. It could be very compressed, but it would be like that. You'd have high volatility and you get some kind of a last minute like up thrust, then a drop. This is more typically what you see in like a distribution. Okay, so if this doesn't happen and you can manage to hold a support here, I'm just confused by the nature of the move. So right now I'm like, I can't tell you for sure because I'm not able to tell for sure. Volume tells me that most of the volume is in the tops. That's kind of distributive. But I'm not going to like ignore it if it manages to hold support and tries to continue. That's silly, you know. So we're going to have to just watch the volatility on GME. It's really close for confirmation, but this is the same area. I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's the same area that you would also distribute in. So you need it to hold above 2233. Okay. Yeah, I'm just seeing like chop here on IWM around 210. Not really seeing any kind of direction yet. AMC's at 512 again, failed to get over 514. That was a level I marked off a little while back. I don't know if it's the best one, but it's definitely one of them. I felt like that was the sort of the upper. If you were talking about this, I know it's a little strange, but if you were talking about this upper area as a range, if you were talking about this current supply zone as a range, you'd probably say that the bottom of that supply zone is around 508 and the top is up here around, 516. 514 is kind of like the middle of that. I know that's confusing because you're like, wait a minute, you said 510. No, it's like 510 is like the lower middle. Like if you break everything up into 50-50 quadrants, it makes more sense. But I hope that makes sense because I'm not telling you it's a different number. But if you look at where we're anchoring at the top, it's like 514. If you look at where we're anchoring at the bottom, it's like 510. But the anchoring isn't actually like the peaks or the valleys. It's just kind of like the wraparound value. All right, hang on. Cats are still being cats. Yeah, I know. I don't think that I don't believe in myself. I think it's just that even in finding important things, if I'm not able to define what those things are, then I should at least have a sort of a pinch of skepticism about my own ideas. And what I found yesterday was that there was a lot of positive, that I've been using this sine wave ideas, the sine wave methodology to find a lot of really good targets. And there's a lot of positivity to that because it's been very effective at times for certain things, but the interpretation of those things is in question. So I know I speak very heady-like. It's just the words that I use. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to make myself sound smart or something. I really genuinely don't use other words. So what I'm saying is that like I thought that I knew what the principles were, and that's why I would get it kind of right a lot. I still have some of them that I think are really solid principles. Like waveform crosses are really easy to follow. They're really solid, but they're slightly unpredictable when you look at them as continuation markers. So like right now, we've got a waveform cross right here. We're bonking our heads on it. Like literally we went up, went back down through it, and then we came back up to it. Super easy trade because if you can interpret a bottom, and which is just a matter of sometimes just a trend check, like, oh, it broke out of a trend or something, and then it has a higher low or a higher high, and then it keeps going. That's easy. That's an easy trade because it's probably going to come back to that wave. Pretty simple. But continuation over that wave is different. That's like when we get the S curve that goes above it. And then what I noticed yesterday was that a lot of the markers that we're looking at don't necessarily point to the top. A lot of times they indicate more of like a pivot point, which there's complication to that as well. But I would say that pivot idea is nebulous. It's ambiguous. It's too ambiguous. It's hazy, right? It's not clear. And that's not good because if you can find pivots, they should indicate either a breakout level or a bottom. But you have to be able to then interpret it and make sure you get it right. So yesterday I was doing a lot with that. And I was just kind of trying to make sure I gathered my thoughts so that I'm speaking clearly about it. And I think at some point it just requires more precise language and method. And I'm pretty precise, but I don't think I've been overly consistent with the interpretation of these kind of markers. And that's not a good thing. I think you want to be as consistent as you can be. So, especially if I believe in it, and I do believe in it. I think it's going to work. I think it's going to work really well. I do. But I can't do that unless I can kind of be more specific about it. So right now I've got a marker set. Frankly, we're kind of at it at the moment, and it was marked off at 567. Good news is that's also like the liquidity top. I mean, when you look at like the supply from back when we were first up there, that's pretty much where it's at. So it's a common sense target. That's always a plus. So that's one. So one target was, it's a series of intersections, maybe pivot points, maybe targets. So that's one. Two is it's already a supply zone. So that's a plus. That makes it easy to believe as a target. Three is it's the breakout target for this ascending triangle. It's the average breakout target for the ascending triangle. So it could come a little above it, could come a little below it, but it's there. That's good. And then four, it's actually the breakout target for an S-curve as well. And so it may look like the S-curve and the triangle target are the same, but they're not, because one is 70% of the other. One is measured to the middle here. One is measured as a 70% of this move, which is kind of interesting because it's essentially the same thing, which is fascinating because I didn't really think about that until we did that a few minutes ago. And if you notice, like the way it's positioned is the 70%. So the S-curve bottom is on 504. That target is measured out to 504. But the actual ascending triangle is measured to from 516 up. But it's a 70% move, and you notice they're the same. How is that possible? I don't know. Maybe it has to do with the fact that they're anchoring it around 504, and so that's my 50%. But that the extension ends up going enough above it that it's like a 70% reduction. And that's probably not that complicated if you think about it. I don't know how you would code that in terms of get away from him. He's just sleeping. Gosh, these cats are driving me crazy today. She walk up to him. He's in his bed. She's walking up to him, growling at him. He's sleeping, man. Could you imagine how psychopathic that would be for like humans? I know they're cats. They're not the same. But my cat is a psychopath. Imagine if your sister or your wife or whatever, I'm sorry, it's the girl cat. I have to just make it analogous. Imagine if she just woke up to you and you're resting in your bed and she just starts growling at you. You're not doing anything. You're just resting. You guys are like, my wife does that all the time. Sorry. That's such a cliche though. But no, she's like crazy. She's crazy. Imagine just another human being walking up to you while you're resting and just start going like, I'm gonna kill you. Don't you move. I'll crit you. I'll cut you good. And you're like, what the heck, man? It's like they're prison or something, you know? Like, gonna shank each other. It's just like crazy, man. What is wrong with you? That's how I think about her whenever she does that. She just walks up to him, smells him, and then starts growling and hissing at him. And I'm like, he's just laying there. And he's wrong too sometimes. He's the instigator sometimes, but she's crazy. That's a crazy dude. Some of y'all are like, she just doesn't feel comfortable. She needs to be feeling comfortable. He just makes her uncomfortable. Yeah, but she's the one sticking her nose in his face. He's not doing anything. So if she's really that uncomfortable, maybe she shouldn't be sticking her nose in his face. That's how I feel about it. Are you serious? She did it again. Are you serious? Stop it. Stop it. Leave him alone. She wasn't even close to him that time. She was like 3 feet away, looked up at him, made eye contact, and just hissed at him. I have to tell you, he has done nothing this morning. And he is often the one that I'm spraying because I'm like, you're being a jerk now. He will like, they're like back and forth, passive aggressive. He's usually the one I'm like spraying. But, well, I say that he is, not usually she is, but she just did it again. Can't even look at you? Give me a break. Give me a break, cat. Cats are not trading cards, and I would not just trade them. But if I could trade my one cat, I would trade her for something else. Honestly, I think her being outside and the other girl cat being inside would probably be better. But I don't even know. You look like cat psychology and junk. They love to have their space. They're territorial. I get it. Try to give my animals as much as I can to help them be like calm and relaxed in their environment, but this is getting ridiculous this morning. This is like the 7th time this morning I've had to get up. I told myself earlier, I said, I'm not going to get involved in their cat drama. It's just going to stress me out. I'm going to be getting up and down like left and right. And here I am getting involved in cat drama. It's like I can't keep myself out of it. Ridiculous, man. All right, well, if I had a bell or a gong, I'd be ringing it right now because I think we just passed through that point. So obviously it can't be a target, not the way I drew it. So that stinks. Could be a pivot, could be a break target. We'll see. Good says AMC. I know. I'm doing it. We're looking at AMC right now. Are you upset that I'm talking about my cats? It's been about 2 minutes. I'm not a vending machine, guys. You can't be like, A39. I put in my quarters. I will talk about stuff if you ask me to, but just relax. There's nothing to say right now. I just said that it passed through the marker. So I was just thinking about those vending machines. You have to put in like the number and the letters. 32F. Are there really that many things in a vending machine that it can't be simpler? Am I stupid? Is there more than 26 items in a vending machine? Maybe there's a lot more than 26. There's probably like 30 or 40. I feel like punching in a number and then hitting select would probably be enough. Why do we have to have like why do we have to have bingo numbers for vending machines? Is there a reason for that? That doesn't even make sense. Because that's like, oh, I need to have 26 times 99 numbers. No, you don't. No vending machine has 26 times 99 items. Like, why do you need that many numbers available? I don't know. Maybe there's a reason for that. It helps organize inventory and data tracking across several machines. Thanks for being the smart one in the group. Titleist. Of course you're right. Yeah, you're right. That's probably why. You're probably right. Maybe it's more of a supplier thing. That's an interesting question to ask, but I don't think that's the case. I'd be very, very, very surprised if, like, Bubblicious Bubblegum is the same number on every machine that it's in. That would be really funny, though, if it was, and we just never noticed. Some of you are like, that's not funny. I don't care. Well, I think that's interesting. It's like a whole network of organization that you just take for granted. That would be cool, though. I mean, that'd be kind of neat. Then you could assign a number to everything. Yeah, they are kind of random, aren't they? I don't know. Now I might have to like look. Next time I see a vending machine, I'm gonna like take notice. I'm not talking about the vending machines that have like the big like for Cokes or whatever, where you just push like the button for soda. You just push the button what you want. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ones that you have to like punch in a number. Well, I'm not liking that volume on AMC this morning. It's better than it has been, I guess. This is much more elevated than recent, but I still don't like where the volume is in that push up. And we're not seeing a continuation just yet. It's odd. GME is at 2237. It hit its head on 2250. What is that? 2252. It's not looking too great. I gotta be honest with you guys. It's not awful. It's just not great. See, this dip right here looks like a sign of weakness to me. I hope I'm wrong. See, chop through, it could be a bottom. This didn't come too high, so maybe. Let me see where this top is. I got to look at this like a micro range, and that's kind of hard to do. It's a little dangerous too. Dangerous? No one's sitting there ready to chop your hand off, Booksy. Just relax. It's not dangerous. Well, what I mean by that is that micro ranges are not very good for things like Wyckoff and stuff. You can try to use them, but every micro range that you look at is just an iterative move. So it's like it's playing into a bigger move always. Then it becomes a question of like, what's the bigger move? And then what's the bigger move? And then what's the bigger move? And then what's the bigger move? Until you get up to about 4 hours to a day. And then that's really where the rubber meets the road. So for staring at micro charts, you can use Wyckoff, but I'd say it's dangerous because you might make an assumption about something and it's not really that big of a deal. Or you might think that it's not important, and then it actually is a really important place in the bigger picture, you know. So probably a good idea to zoom out right now. Oh, I'm talking about that. I know. I said I was going to clean my chart up today, but I haven't gotten to it yet. And I got to organize this stuff somehow. Maybe figure out a way to organize that better so I can use it. And I want to see the 4 hour, so I'm going to clean this up a bit. Well, we've done a really good job identifying these little pivots, these lows. 1, 2, 3 in a row have been called out on this 4 hour chart. We're not doing a good job of identifying the breakout and the target, or at least not yet. Maybe we're right on the cusp here, but it's hard to say. Yeah, you know, it kind of just reminds me of like just a slow walkout. We're getting like higher pushes over these creeks, but we keep retreating low. It's like we're not making any headway because we keep making lower lows lately on these push downs. So yeah, I guess it's cool that we're making some progress, but this is annoying. I'm going to give it like another hour. Let's see. So here's what I'm looking at right now is I'm looking at possibly holding support above here, above 509 as a very, very positive sign. I said that this morning. That's why I was looking at that level. has utmost importance, right? Because it's above the, locally it's important because it's above the creek and it's a back test, but on the big picture it is as well. I mean, on the big picture, it's definitely a back test here, and there's no doubt in my mind that's very significant. So if it were to hold above here, you would expect potential for a continuation, but it hasn't made, at least as far as I can tell, it hasn't made an SOS. Like, we haven't made an SOS locally. All I'm saying is, I mean, I'm just seeing a lot of chop. I really don't like this patterning right now. Just not a fan. I think it's very similar to what we experienced back here, where you got that double top early, and then we had some weird drop, and then we had a massive like double flush. It's actually really similar. We have like a perceived like double top here, and then we came back later and we made like a massive double flush. I mean, it's almost identical. It's like purposely trying to mislead both sides of the market in a very fast-paced move, and then you're just kind of left with wherever you ended it up. You know, like, where did you end up? Did you end up in a good place or a bad place? So it looks like a distributive action, and then it goes down and it looks like an accumulative action, and then it goes back to like basically nowhere. It did make it higher here, so there's a question mark. It's like, well, we know this S-curve completed where the others didn't, and then it's doing it. So basically it completed the S-curve, and then it did like a sell through, and then it did a double flush. So it's a whole lot of fancy terminology to say it's basically not moved anywhere. But in the in the grand scheme of things, I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, we ended up back testing the 4 hour here. So that double flush may have just been to get back to retest once again, like the $5 floor area. That could have been it. It's a higher low. And then we push back up as a result of that. We're now kind of floating here in this little pocket, which frankly means absolutely nothing. So it's like, it's definitely intentionally trying to obscure the move because a bear is going to look at this and think it's a UTAD, that it's an upthrust and this is just a gasp, and then it's going to dump. And a bull's going to look at this and say, yeah, but it's above the creek and it's above that 510 now. If it finds support, it should just go. And I'm kind of leaning that way, but I could see why a bear might look at this and be convinced that they're right, because aside from this not making a new low on the big picture, you could read a double flush either way you want to read it. And so if you're reading it as bearish, you'd probably think the reason this isn't going any higher is because it's getting ready to flush back through, which it's already done like 3 times. So good on you, I guess, operator. You're making it very, very challenging, I think. I'm going to hang my hat on the principle of support here. I think if we can hold this support here in this pocket, we're going to be just fine. I think it's going to be really bullish. I'm not going to look at these up thrusts anymore as super good or super bad. I think they're just part of the operation here to drive the price up and down to where they want it. This looks like a solid buy-in though. I like that rounded volume here. That's nice. It's a little different than like this one. So you can see the difference hopefully. So first we had a really high volume bottom. Then we have a high volume push up. And then the top volume actually isn't the highest. This is on the 1 hour. That is actually not the highest volume, which is kind of nice. So it didn't just peak, right? And then the volume kind of rounds off as the chart is kind of rounding and flattening. That's more positive for upward movement. That's very different than this, which kind of had like a weak bottom, and then it has this massive upthrust that's followed by nothing but just red down, and the volume kind of drops off a cliff rapidly. This looks like a healthier buy-in. So I'm hoping that's a good sign. It just does. My cats finally went to sleep. I guess they're tired of being sprayed. That's the one thing you can rely on with cats. They're going to get tired quick and fall asleep. They sleep like most of their day away. So they just horted now. Yeah, yeah, they're always shorting. Einstein's expecting news to tank the market. Well, that's a pretty bold claim. I think we already got the news. What else are we looking for? I'm not sure what you're saying. Like, what news would you be looking for to tank the market? I'm just curious. I know you're a long-time listener. You're not somebody that's trying to troll. So I'm genuinely just asking. Like, what would you be looking for? War? Okay. That's not a good thing to look for. I hope that's not what happens. I think fear of war, maybe. I don't know about World War III. I hate to say it, but I don't think... I don't know. I don't want to talk that way. I think if Iran... I think that's the big fear right now, I guess, was Iran's drone strikes, Israel drone strikes or whatever. I think that... I don't want to talk about geopolitics, but I think that Russia, their invasion of the Ukraine was probably the biggest potential catalyst. I don't think Israel and Palestine and Iran being connected to that make any sense. So World War III was where World War I and World War II were specifically called that because of the involvements, I guess, in everybody, and they weren't called World War I, till way later. It was called the Great War, right? So there's an assumption in saying World War III is happening that somehow everybody's going to be involved in a certain conflict, We don't call every war like World War III, so... And we've been in other wars, like we were in the Iraq War... We're in the Ukraine war right now. Like, we're providing materials, so we're in the Israeli-Palestinian war. Like, I don't know. Are possible yen issues? Shutting the economy down, like COVID. Yeah, I guess I'm curious why you think that we have to have news right now that tanks the market, but we just had news that would probably prop up small caps and look very positive for many small caps. It just seems like counterintuitive. Like, are you saying that there's like a period of elation and then we're going to go quickly into a reversal? Everything's going to dump? Again, like maybe from a technical standpoint, you could argue this is like a head fake and it's going to then flush, and there's some kind of a news that needs to flush. But I still think on like the big picture, just to be fair, like the Russell 2000 hasn't even really had its day in the sun. I mean, a lot of people are going to say it's this, but I don't think that's it. That's like nothing compared to where it could be right now. It's not even gotten close to breaching all-time highs just yet. This is probably the closest it's gotten at 227. But if you look at that as like a wave cross with a backup, now would be the time to run it up high. So I don't know. We'll see. That's kind of, I mean, you can have whatever opinion you want to have. I'm not saying that one has, but I don't know if it's fair to say one has to die for the other to go up. I think that that's somewhat true for in some circumstances. Like maybe this is a good one because SPY already had its big move, so like, or it's had huge moves, right, to new all-time highs. So a corrective measure on SPY may not track the same way to small caps. But again, like, I'm not really sure, aside from like a rate cut, what other news we would need. I don't feel like we would need any other news. So my expectation at this point is that we're pricing in stuff into September. That's why I'm kind of curious why we would think that it needed, why you would think that it needed to happen like now. Because like to me, it's like, I don't really know why you would need any other news at this time. This just feels like nothing to me, like delays. And I said that yesterday on IWM, and then today we popped up really high, and it was like nothing changed from yesterday, as far as I'm aware. You know, so I'm not really sure what to make of it, except for like an SOS with a backup, and it did hold. It held its creek. That was kind of the only criteria I could find for maybe a potential reversal, was like it could hold right here, and it could possibly reverse, and that'd have to be that, and that's what happened. So, but even yesterday I said I thought it'd be better if this dropped down again, because I don't like that chop to the upside. I still thought it needed to have a little pullback. Never did. AMC did. It had its pullback this morning. Yeah, I know. A lot of the world's energy goes through there. But it's also a big part of the reason why alternative energies have been more thoroughly explored. People are waking up to the fact that there could be a day where there's not a easy access to certain energies. And I'm not going to say anything else about that. I'm just saying, I think that's, people are aware of that. I don't know. You're not wrong. It's still a really big deal. Anywho. Well, you're right about one thing. It is chopping. And MPW is just taking off, I guess. I don't know. Just going. I'm not complaining. AMC's red, down 0.1%. It's really not really red. It's just kind of flat on the day. It's at 0 now. This is nothing really to talk about right there. Except that it did go down and make the small retracement this morning, and that's significant to me. The volume looks a lot better to me on the 1 hour. It just looks like a consolidation at this time. So we'll see what happens. It's not out of the question it could come down again to 508, like push a little lower. That's what I was looking at on the really small scale. I was trying to see what was going on with that tiny little range right here, but it felt like a bit of a waste of time, because I'm like, well, it could be that that's a little distribution, but I wanted to see where it would go if it did, and it doesn't really look like it would need to go very far anyways. So it's kind of the same deal. Nothing really changed. And there's nothing wrong with that. So if you're like, well, why did you waste your time? I didn't waste my time. I just needed to check. It's important to know what's going on big picture to see if it makes sense. So if this were to drop now, I'd be a little nervous again of that UTAD possibility, like the push up and the secondary push up with a sell off. But I like the volume better here than I do over here, at least for now. So at this time, I'm a little happier with what we're seeing right now than what we were seeing yesterday on open. Very similar setups, but this looks a little stronger to me, and I like that it came back, tested below 510. My pivot was about 30 minutes ago. So at this point, once again, it's like, Booksy, what was that about? I don't know. And it's weird to me because it may seem that maybe these are irrelevant, but part of me wonders if there's a like kind of big picture, there's actually something else that may attribute to that later. So like if we were to go up later, do these markers disappear? No, they don't. And sometimes it's interesting, like GME, if you look at the 2021 run, I've got it on my chart kind of right now, and GME is still chopping above 2232. Really hoping this isn't like a distribution. But it did have a double top and then tried to push back below 2230. So we'll see. Really just has to hold on to that level. But I was about to say that if you look at 2021 June run up, the markers that I've got on the chart right now that are yellow on the current run up, they actually don't hit them till they cross later. So this ends up being like a pivot, and that's why I marked it off on the chart here that we would potentially be pivoting on this Monday going into Tuesday. And it looks really accurate so far. Fingers crossed. We don't know, that's going to hold up. But it did pivot there, which is interesting. So I was like, I assumed that was going to be a pivot, not the high. Because in the June run up, it actually doesn't approach these levels until after that cross. And what's really fascinating in that June run up is it hits pretty much all of them in sequence. It hits like one, then it pumps to the next. And it's like a triple top motion. So part of me wonders if, when we look at this kind of setup and we're thinking about these intersections and we're like, well, hey, it didn't go there. Okay, well, if it's a pivot, it may not. And we could end up in a situation kind of like that later, where these don't just disappear, they actually are acting as supply and demand levels, maybe during a SOS phase. And I think that's, let me just say it this way. I think if we go up and we end up some point in the next few days or whenever, and I'm not hoping for nothing here, I hope, but if we end up back up here in the next few days, I would be really interested to see if these are still met in some form. And I think that it's probable that they would be. So at this point, I'm kind of indifferent about it if it's not blowing up right at that moment. Although I do think that the S-curve, this is kind of a non-negotiable one for me. That S-curve trajectory should be this about 79 degrees. And then everything else we'll just have to wait. The rest of these intersections could be pivots. And that's what I was doing. Again, I keep repeating myself, but I want people to know, because I felt like I spent a lot of time on that yesterday. And there was a lot of people that just kind of like dipped out when I started talking about that stuff. That to me is really important. It's a defining the method of trading that you're using. It wasn't not a waste of time. It was a huge, huge success on my part. In my mind, I mean, not on my part. That sounds like arrogant. But in my mind, it was a huge success for me to do that because it's now giving me a better structure to use. And also I can start now going back and looking at, all right, that marker didn't act as or maybe it acted as a price target, but it didn't act as like a timing target. Does that make sense? Do I think this is still a potential price target? Oh yeah. Yeah. But as a timing target, did it work? No. So then what are you left with? Well, we keep getting like peaks or valleys on these intersections, which some people are just saying, and I don't blame them, and I've even echoed it at times, that it's just delays, that this is potential spots for moves, right? And it's not happening. But I think there's more to it than that. I think it's a build out that retrospect will help define and clarify. So I don't like the idea of kind of shooting into the dark with lines and saying that I think this has to be a target or I think this has to be a pivot unless I'm really sure. And so right now I think that 467 is a target. I think the timing of this is not right. It could be a pivot timing target. This could be where we see the breakout and go. But it would have to be something like a squeeze, you know. And right now that's a little dangerous to say because you could definitely see how it's just dropping it down a few pennies suddenly could cause a big shakeout. So as a matter of principle, I'm going to keep doing that kind of stuff on here. And if that's not something you're interested in, then that's not the right channel for you, you know. Because it's important for me to make sure that I'm constantly like growing in the skills and that over time I'm getting better at what I'm trying to do. And that's part of it for me. So if you just need somebody to stare at stocks and kind of hype them up, I'm not your guy. I'm really looking for a better, fuller understanding of the market every single day that I come on here, and I want to improve. So that's my goal, is to get better at it and improve. So this is an example of like what we're talking about. Like when we came on this morning, I said, you know, there's a gap fill, but it's possible that we don't actually fill the gap right away because sometimes during like a breakout, you may go ahead and go to your target before doing any kind of retracement, and it just depends on whether or not it finds support. So it came down first thing and it found support at 209.90s here, at least for now. It may not hold up. This could just be a double top. But that is just an example of like a simple understanding of like, okay, how the market moves can save you from some pain, you know. And there was some pretty clear supports and resistances over here. So yes, was the gap important? Sure. It probably enticed a lot of shorts to sell it really quick and a lot of paper hands to sell really quick. But I don't know if the good news was kind of done enough. So now we're going to kind of wait it out again, see if it can find any other additional support. I want to say above 211.60s is important. I marked off this region. This is kind of an area where you'd want to find support. Previously, we've not even really checked it during regular trading hours, so it might be prudent to try to test it now. But 215 or 214.80s, something like that, that's actually where I have my target. And if you're being really conservative about it, you may not want to trade past the gap or something, because sometimes that can cause issues. And that's at like 213.70. Sometimes the bottom of a gap or a bottom of a supply or something like that can cause some issues. So if I'm trading this right now, I'm probably watching volume really closely to see if it's shrinking. I'm watching RSI to see if it's divergent. If it's not shrinking volume and it's not divergent RSI, you're probably safe for the moment to continue to hold it and let it go higher. And then AMC just looks like it's either about to explode or dump. This does not look like a normal chop pattern to me. It looks like it's trying to either, like it's basically either at this point, this is a UTAD, or this is just frankly a support. Like this is a creek jump. You see that move low? So look at the reaction from that move low and see what happens after it moves low. Notice that it just floats here. It's made a higher low above 5 at 511. So it dipped down to 508, 509, which is what we wanted to see first thing. It pumped up, hasn't pushed resistance, or it hasn't pushed what we call it maybe the buying climax yet, which is the peak here. It did, though, double top at 514. So it's going to be a tricky one. At 514 I've had on my chart for a while, but I don't think it was meant to be like prophetic. I really just thought that that was kind of the anchor here, and I think 510 is really the anchor down here. But I actually thought 506 early on because of where it broke support early, which was back on the 13th. 2 days ago, it pushed off of 506. So I had labeled 506 as important. We ended up coming back beneath that. We did break back above it, and then we got a big volume influx as we jumped the creek. So oddly, I mean, I think I picked the right numbers, which is fine. And it's not like there were that many to choose from, right? You could have gotten lucky. We've not really been moving very far. But I think I picked the right numbers because 506 here and then 514 here. I think they're going to be like pretty critical, you know. I guess I could be happy about that too. These are common sense numbers. They were not, anyone could have gotten them. It's not some kind of Booksy exclusive. 506 was really easy because it was all we were chopping along for like 2 days. So it was super simple. 514 is a little trickier. I think I remember going through and looking at this breakdown yesterday, and I think I bumped my number from like 513 to 514 or something like that. I remember I changed it like slightly because they chopped around a slightly different number at the top. Anytime there's a drop off, like a little cliff, notice the number at which it's compressing into before it drops. That's your supply, that's your support. It act as either one. It's not actually like the highs and lows, which you might think. They're part of it. They'll be checked. But the main number is that drop-off level. So pay attention to that if you guys are watching some chopping movement, you know. Where is it like anchoring? The dance around that number is important. And I mark off all the time like tangents and trajectories based on those. Those to me define more or less like direction, I guess, for waves or wave crosses later. The trends, I should say, that are built into it. Like this, for example, there's a trend here that's kind of built into the wave cross later. But the anchoring points are really the more crucial liquidity levels that you should mark. So if you're ever in doubt, like if you don't know that, some people on here have charted a lot, and that's like no brainer or whatever. If you're newer to charting, wicks are important. They're not. You shouldn't ignore them. Obviously, if the wick it's most important when it goes above and below a resistance or a support, and then returns back. It can be very significant for direction, but and trends are important too. Just for, again, the trend is your friend, right? Until it isn't, and then that's a good way to trade as well. But if you're doing what I'm doing here with like the wave stuff, don't just keep it to the wave stuff. Try to also remember to do the horizontals. And so selling off from 513 would indicate that you're not, if you were to sell off from 513 or 514 right now, it would indicate it's really right on the edge of both. That's probably why I flip-flopped. It's like right, that's 513, and then like a hair higher is 514. So either one. Anyways, that's a good way to understand where is it consolidating? That's usually a support or resistance. Simple stuff, okay? And I pay very close attention to those early in an advancement because they're often very important. Like when, for example, when we came up from that recent low at 580s, if you go back and you look at those consolidation levels, they were the same as they are now. I mean, there was like that 504 area, right? So like there's no reason to assume you're going to advance unless you can find support over that region, and we just haven't done it. Hence why I was saying like yesterday, we just don't have any confirmation yet. It doesn't really matter if you're blue in the face about it. There's no strong confirmation. This is the closest we've come, in my opinion, to confirmation, and we're really, really close. This was an almost, but not quite, and I felt kind of bearish about this one just because of the way it moved. This one looks a little better to me. So this advancement right here could be it. So if I see it move above to like 520s and find support, it should just go. It should be out. But still, it's not confirmed yet. Even in the midst of this positivity here, it's like, not quite there. And if you get frustrated by that, I would just ask you guys like, hey, you know, make sure that I can't tell you how to trade exactly, but I would not be trading unless I had super strong confirmation or I'm just trading long. I might swing off of a bottom back to like a support or back to a hook or back to a wave. That's about as best of a swing trade as I could get. But if we're breaking out, that's a different kind of swing. You need to see that confirmation. Yeah. Why is everyone talking about a dump? What do I think the probability is of a dump? I don't think it's super high. Like if you've been in here, there's been chances of like drops. I don't think of a drop, or I guess as like a necessarily a bad thing. So that, not to get all semantic-y on you, but are you talking about a drop like that continues down to like 3 or really low? Are you thinking about just like a massive pullback again? There's a pretty distinct difference. This to me was a pretty strong like effort right here. And if this is going to drop, this would be like a UTAD situation. That's why I said I don't really feel very positive right now if it drops back below the creek, because it's like 2 attempts that failed. And so if this drops below, you know, like that 505 or whatever level, all of a sudden, that would be potentially very dangerous. I don't think that the current creek setup really supports a huge drop because of everything being so flat. It's very difficult, and I don't, you know, you can see like, oh, if it dropped down, it could go down to near 502 again, or if it dropped down, it could maybe come down lower and it would hit that creek. But these can also act as like midway points. So this could be like an intersect around 502 that then continues down low, and then you have to look at the next one and the next one and so on and so forth. Do I think it's possible that it's setting up for something like that? Sure. Do I think it's high probability? I'll say this much. Every time I've thought it's going to drop, I've kind of had the same 2 or 3 markers on the chart, and they just keep coming back up. So one is 491, one is 487, and one's 465. But as the chart has continued forward, and we're at 514 right now, y'all, so we're really close. As the chart has continued forward, what we've managed to do is every time we've made those kind of sell-throughs is we keep making higher lows. Now, that doesn't mean that it's bullish in and of itself. You guys are like, yes, it does. No, it doesn't, because we also made higher lows on these repeated up thrusts on this top. So in and of itself, higher highs and higher lows is not by itself necessarily bullish. I know it sounds like it would be, but it's totally dependent on the context. It is. This was not a bullish price action back here. You know, higher highs, higher lows. Chop, chop, chop. This did it multiple times, right? And tried to do this. I mean, we've done it iteratively multiple times, right? Here, that kind of stuff. I don't want to go back through the whole chart, but the point is like, I'm also noticing though, because remember what we said was the goal here. We thought the goal from the beginning of this range was it would whip around for a long time until eventually it came to, and a long time can be a lot of things. It could be 2 months, it could be 3 months, it could be 4 months, it could be 6 months, right? Whatever. But it was going to whip around until eventually it found a support on 580 or 485. Now, looking at this, you might see this and think this just looks really pathetic. Like it's a really low volume bottom on 485. And that's kind of been my main, I guess I would say, argument. Like that's been kind of the main argument that I've had with myself, is that it looks kind of wimpy. But I gotta kind of just say it. I don't know how else to say it. Accumulation just ends with a whimper. I mean, it's typically very boring at the end. And if you go back to the May breakout, the ending of it is very like, there's some high volatility right before it, but then like the very end is extremely kind of boring. Like it's just really low chop down. Is pretty darn low volume. It just basically shrinks to nothing. There isn't some massive high volume bottom that's like a really clear bottom. That doesn't typically happen on an accumulation. It can be pretty benign. It's just like all of a sudden you're just above the support you need to be above, and then you're going. So my main reason for thinking we were going to pull back was this 491 didn't seem strongly checked. So this was, I mean, a while ago now, over a week ago now, but back on the 8th of August, the 7th into the 8th, we kind of tested 495. And then as we kept chopping up, I'm like, you know, a natural place to come back to would be 491. And it kept appearing as like intersections. And then looking at the support, I'm like, yeah, it's right below the high liquidity. We dipped into it quite a few times in early August, the earlier parts of August, the 2nd through the 6th. It would make sense to touch it again and then go. And just, it's not necessarily making a new low. And we had a little tiny gap down here in the 480s. And I was like, well, you could double bottom. We were looking for all kinds of stuff. So I've been very acutely aware of a bearish possibility here in this chop. And then I've been talking about the nature of these as potentially distributive, because they are in some ways distributive looking. They just are. But every time it's done it, it's not been able to, I would say I'm just saying like sellers aren't able to, they don't seem to be able to advance it back down just yet. So I guess my final thought on this, I'm just kind of recapping for you. My final thought on is this. If you have a motif of like chopping to the upside and then dropping harshly, that will work until when? It's not a trick question. Just think about it. And it's on the chart right now. When does that like stop working? If the motif is we're going to pump it down as low as we can go, or pump it up as high as we can go, and then chop and then drop, and then see if we can get new lows, when does it stop working? Well, two things. One, it stops working after your sellers no longer push it down low enough. And I think we saw that. There was a major change right here at the 482 mark. So then the seller argument has to be, if you're short right now, the seller argument would have to be that we didn't have enough ammunition to drop it below 485, which by the way is the level you would want to drop it below, right? So we're taking it up in order to chop longer and build a greater cause to drop it lower. That would have to be the short argument right now. And is it a good argument? Well, I think they could make that argument. There's some parts of this that definitely look highly distributive. There's some parts of this that look like they could be in the favor of bears. The rapid up thrust, like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 here, that's a bearish kind of move. So the question, again, I repeat it, when does it stop working? I think it's kind of self-evident, you know? One is if the sellers can't push it lower and they're not really getting the buy-in. Like the weak hands aren't buying it. They're not buying the move. They're not letting go of their shares. And there's not enough shorts to continue to push the price to new lows. And the buyers are stopping it on the lows. They're not selling it off through the top all the way down. They're actually waiting and buying in more. And then the simplest visual that I can give you is the creek jump. So when does it stop working? Well, if you jump the creek. Because now you've signaled all the buyers. So if your operator's bullish, they're doing that on purpose to drive shorts into the play and make it appear one way when it's really going the other. If the buyer is bearish and that's what's going on right now, the only way that you're going to get another major bearish signal is dropping below 507. So in part of it is just like probability. You're thinking like, well, is that probable? I would say no, but I also think that you can't take anything for granted in the market. So it's simpler for me to just say it like I've said it repeatedly, like just look at the levels. Yeah, I know it sucks that we're only in a 5 to 10 cent range or whatever, but that means you have to pay attention. You know what I mean? Some of you guys are like, we're joking about it, and I'm with you. I'm like, this is silly, right? You're like, well, we're only moving like a few pennies here or there. It doesn't matter. No, it doesn't until it does, right? And all of a sudden, a few pennies is a breakout or a breakdown. And we're at that point right now. We are. There's no if and buts about it. We are at that point right now. So this idea of like drop and chop works until it doesn't. And then all of a sudden, if you drop again, you got to suddenly drop it through a really major support that you've jumped over. That's where it stops working. So this iteration changed, in my opinion. I think this was it. It failed to make a new low here. I mean, I genuinely think we were right. I know that I've said that a few times, but I really do. I think that this in and of itself would have been the breakdown at 1400 normally. So at first it started by pushing higher than it normally did. It had never done that before. So at 9 or whatever, I'm just reading my chart, 940 on the 9th, it started doing something different. It changed character, went over 503. The reason that was so significant was because it was chopping back above that drop point. We had not yet done that. That drop point had acted as a really strong resistance on each of the iterations that came before it until then. Then at 1400 on that Friday, when we were expecting some kind of pivot or something, at the very least, I said, I think that's where the iterations collapse. And I think I was right. I think that is where the iterations collapsed. Notice the pattern here, and then see that pattern follow through right here until all of a sudden it doesn't. So this should have been right there at like 1400. If the iterations were the same every time, this should have been the sell down. Instead, it pumped up higher, it sold down, and it barely even breached below 497. And then all of a sudden it goes into finishing the S-curve, and that's like, it's done. And you're like, well, that's different. Did another move. And then ever since then, it's been kind of just, in my opinion, like, I don't know what exactly to make of this in terms of like delay, but then we're chopping out and we're finishing that right side. And I think if you were going to get a big sell down, it should have been like here somewhere, Yeah, like this should have been a hook and then a big drop. But I think we came high. I don't know. Maybe we came, I don't say we came too high, but we came high enough that it could easily be that that's not going to happen. So if it goes back below, 50, I don't know, it keeps changing because we keep moving forward. But if it goes back below like 506, maybe 505, you might see a major change in character in terms of volume. But until that point, you're pretty safe here. Like any kind of a backup wouldn't necessarily be that big of a deal. It's just potential for regaining interest and then pushing and advancing again. What's more important is confirmation, and that comes above 518. So, yeah. So just to summarize again, like there's not a trick question. It's like you're doing kind of the same thing every time, and that's fine. And you can do that and expect the same results every time. But as soon as it sort of changes character and you stop getting the same results, now all of a sudden it doesn't look like the same exact motion doesn't look like a drop anymore. The same exact motion now looks like a creek cross. So I just doodled it on the screen for you. And that's what I'm trying to say. It may not be that obvious, but that's the same motion. It just didn't go as low here. So suddenly it's like, oh. So I think our problem isn't that this didn't change. I think our problem is that what happened, unfortunately, is that this really widened out. It started widening out more slowly. So we did get a change of character, but it didn't really advance far enough. And this kind of stinks, but this is just the nature of it. And so what we ended up having was like a wider creek, right? And then we started doing, this is almost exactly what happened. I'm like drawing it right now. We started doing a kind of a bizarre dance right here to try to like advance, but it's taking forever to do that. So you're getting these like really slow layups into a corner almost, right? And the creeks keep rising, and that's the delay. And unfortunately, at this point, it's kind of come to this time where now we've come across this one, and we're in a position of potential strength because we finally jumped up, but we don't know yet because it hasn't like broken out and because it dropped below that trend, which may have been the goal all along, was to just kind of like test liquidity and a sell off. So you have a clear bear signal, right, which is dropping a trend, and see what happens when the trend drops. So yeah, is this a place where it could potentially fall through? Yeah, I mean, if it fails, that's what I'm saying. Like if it fails, there's a lot of potential for targets now back through all those creeks that we jumped. You could have half a dozen targets, and each one of those, if they capitulate, is going to bring in more sellers, so on and so forth. But you're also like a stone's throw away at this point from just a clean breakout. So, and then where are you going to go? Well, you're going to go up back to the top. So I would say right now it's advantage buyers, because to the downside, you have a lot more problems. Like a lot more problems in terms of creeks. To the upside, all of our creeks are ridiculously high, and that's the thing, is like they're not like right there waiting for you to catch. They're like way up there. That's what I'm saying. Like they're really, really high. So the gap, the draw through, I guess I should say, I don't know what you want to call it, when you go from after 517 is like way up here in the 560s. The draw through going down, there's like one every 20 cents, in terms of creeks. So who's got the advantage? You know what I mean? Like that's the question. It's like, well, frankly, like at this point, buyers have a much stronger advantage because almost everything is pointing like way up here in terms of creeks. You see that? So this is like a massive, there's like a massive drive, you know, this direction, but this direction you've got a lot of, that's not necessarily like how I work it, but I just say like probability if you're just looking for that. That's the most, that's what I would give you, is that it seems like there's a whole lot more now that bears would have to deal with just in terms of like where those levels are. And they're all kind of right there. I mean, they're not, it's still low, like, but these are the levels. I mean, it's like, those are the levels, they're pretty close to where we are. If you look at dollar value, 491, 47, 465, that's like 40 cents. But the closest one I can see here on the upside is maybe there's one like right here at like 540, which is 40 cents. That's like the closest one, you know? So a lot more distance potential for the upside and less resistance. Downside has quite a bit of support that would have to be crossed. So, all right. So wick to this red line. This is a long-term line that goes from the very, very bottom. This one is probably one of those ones that you're wondering why I keep on my chart until it's relevant, and all of a sudden it's like super relevant. So this goes all the way back to a trend that was established in May of 2023. So last summer, there's a trend established here, and we anchored on that trend almost as like a center mark during the SOS phase, which went from December 2023 to now in IWM. And so that's kind of a centerfold anchor, if you want to call it that. It's like a center mark anchor point for this overall trend. It probably is acting as kind of a 50-50 swing around point here, though I wouldn't say it's that exact. Probably not going to be perfect. Well, it's pretty darn close. If you go to the wicks, it's a little low. If you go to the top shelf, to the bottom, it's pretty much right on there. Anyways, so that's one way to think of that is kind of like a midpoint on a wave. So if you breach that, you could have a nice little pop, but I'd also expect it to kind of anchor on it at different times. So you may be a pivot, and it looks like right now it pivoted. Someone will say, like, you know, it's easier just to look across at the 212 and say, well, it hit 212.48 or whatever. You know, that's kind of the level you had anyways, Booksy. So, yeah. But there's reasons for that. And then there's also an S-curve there. So it'll really faint. But that's the way I drew the S-curve on here, was to that marker. So there's a lot of good intersections there. The 215 has to do with the breakout target for that rising ascending triangle, and less to do with anything else. So we'll see. So it's kind of a natural stopping point right there. There's a lot going on. I say natural stopping point, like everything in the market is unnatural, obviously, but I mean, if you're just looking at it from the point of view of like, hey, what's got the most intersections? I mean, that's a really hot area. So yeah, GME is the same as AMC. It's kind of biding time here, and I think the consolidation isn't a bad thing. It looks okay right now. Like, the potential is there to reverse this sucker. If you look at the, you're like, sucker, Booksy, what are you talking about? If you look at the nature of this, it's kind of arcing down, which actually is kind of good. If it were like parabolic, I'd be a little more nervous, but this was almost like an arcing wedge. Like, it started as like a higher wedge, and then it kind of built downward, and it's doing it again here, built downward. I sort of like that motion because it's sort of turning away from, and that's because like sellers are becoming more active, so it's like turning it away from that support. I prefer that in some ways to like the parabolic motion that can become very distributive when approaching like a level. Like, that's like more like these hooks where you get those like hooks to the upside. So not opposed to that, but I'm making that point because there's actually a wedge here that I drew that I think was the one that we were testing yesterday. We broke down out of it, and then we crossed a creek, and that's a very good sign. So like we came through that wedge, and then we made a little M shape, and then we came back up. I wish I could like better define this, but for some reason this kind of price action seems to happen all the time, and I don't really know what to describe it as, except it's not really a spring because it's not really in the right spot for it per se. It kind of is, but I'm talking about in relation to the range. You could interpret it as a spring, but in relationship to that triangle, it's like it just looks like a breakdown of the triangle. For some reason, we seem to find this happens quite a bit, where you come down and you break below a rising support. So it's a trend, and you break below the trend before you form a... We're doing it on the macro, just point in case. Like that's what we did here on the big picture. We came below like the lowest trend that I could find. You see that purple line? And that comes from way back here, but it's weird, right? Because you drop below it almost like intentionally to see what sellers do. And then it just kind of floats back up. And that's kind of where we see springs as most effective in their operations. So it's a dangerous one to try to play into, because I remember I thought the same thing could happen up here, right there. So you just have to wait, because you can't confirm that motion until it comes back up. And it's not like it's too late or something. In this case, we've got a huge amount of space. You're gonna know, if it worked. In that little micro example, it's hard because we wouldn't have seen it until like the last 10 minutes of the day, and when it finally pushed up. So it would have been a very difficult one to play as a trade because there really wasn't any confirmation here. And then it still went all the way back down, even after it pushed up from 21.92 to like 22.30s or something. It still came way back down. So a little tricky. But sometimes that happens. Like I feel like if it's in the right spot, it can happen, and it's a tough one. I just see it all the time, so I feel like mentioning it. I don't know what I should call it. AMC does it all the time. Like all the time. It'll slightly drop a support, like a horizontal, not a horizontal support, but like a trend. It'll like slightly drop a trend, and it'll do like the M cross on a spring, and then it'll reverse. And that's exactly where this happened. I mean, it's pinpointed. We did a really good job pinpointing that, by the way. No, I didn't hit the low. I'm not going to take credit for that. I got pretty close. 2050. Of course, I did think every single bottom could be the bottom because I wasn't sure how far it was going to go. But once we got those creeks drawn, it was like right there on the intersection. And it was nice. And I didn't have to move them again. I just kind of drew them out. I think we drew them out like right here when it dropped right around 22.30s. I finished it, and then it's been the same ever since. It looks really good. Could have done that earlier, I guess, but I originally thought it was going to LPS because that's what happened in 2021. So I thought, well, probably going to do an LPS instead and cross high here. Instead, we did a spring, cross low here. All right, 2271. Yay! Are you doing it, GME? Has it tested 2230? I mean, it's got good volume. Still looks like maybe a tough ask on the... It's getting a bit overcooked on low time frames, but that's okay. Higher time frames are fine. Let me check 15. I don't think it's over bottom 15. So whatever. We're gonna have to default to looking at higher time frames. Almost there on the hourly. That's not a great sign. It can stay pretty overheated on the hourly, but let's check 2 hour. 2 hours got a lot of space. I would say that 2 to 4 hours seems to be a pretty good one. And this is going to be a breakout, by the way, on the 4 hour. So if it can manage to hold trajectory here, it's going to be a breakout really soon on this 4 hour RSI. I think potentially it should then rocket from 55-ish up to probably pretty far. I mean, it could go just as high as it did back in May. So you got a lot of space here. And I would be looking at the mid-cat ears because that's typically where you're going to see that cross anyways. So it'd be here to here. See that? So there's a trend that was broken and then it hooked, and that forms the second ear. And then if you look at the, that's the waveform. So if it breaks here, it should go all the way up to about 80 or so. Could be a little higher, but 80 to 85 is where I would put it. In order for that to happen, it just has to make sure it holds support at 22.32. I don't really see any major back test on the hourly, or 4 hour rather. Good candle. I mean, there's a small check right there. So it did test it, and then it's advancing. It's just really small. But it tested 22.32. It tested 22.28, and then it went up and double bottomed at 22.37. I would just read it as it is, as it's probably confirmed. So it looks like confirmation to me. On a bigger time frame, you might need more. So just remember that, because this has a pretty large back test here that could happen. You could see that fairly easily here. Meaning you could come pretty high to like 23 and then still drop back down to 22.30. At this point, it wouldn't hurt anything. You have to remember, this is the test level. So in the grand scheme of things, you know, could it just take off? Sure, but it wouldn't confuse me at all if it went pretty far up and still came back down. You would just be like, okay, we just need to check that level, you know. So just keep that in mind. Otherwise, though, it looks confirmed. It looks like it hit. Wait, Booksy, you're actually saying it's confirmed? Yeah. I'm not lukewarm on purpose. I'm lukewarm until I'm not. You know, you have to make sure that you're being realistic and watching the market move as it moves. But if it hits the level and it holds it and it doesn't bleed back through it, and then it makes continuation efforts, that counts as confirmation. What I'm saying is that this confirmation may need to be much larger in the end, and we don't know yet. That's important that it found support there, for sure. Just keep in mind, like, if you saw something like this, you shouldn't be surprised. Like later, oh, it's coming back down. You said it was confirmed. Well, it was. It was checked as a support and it held. But the scale of this thing is pretty huge, so a massive drive up here, massive pullback here would not be out of the question. It jumped it. I don't know what to tell you. Unless it's some kind of crazy, like, bull trap, it's confirmation to me. Okay. Honestly, this looks like an S-curve too, so I'm not going to go that far, but I would say that that's a possibility as well. I know you guys don't like hearing that all the time, but it's a possibility that this is just a nice S-curve too. So I couldn't tell you exactly where the middle is on it. Maybe here. It's pretty soon. That makes sense. Thursday again. Frankly, this thing looks like if that's the S-curve, it would be moving up to 25. That's a big move, but it is what it is. Let me see if I can get a middle there. It may not be that soon. Maybe more realistically, like by Monday for GME. That's a bit more realistic. Yeah. 25. So lots could happen between now and Friday. But I think the best thing to happen here would be to push up higher, maybe come up to near 23.23, and then honestly, I think the best thing that could happen would be to come back and retest this floor. And then you'd be in really good shape Monday for, I mean, that would be big deal. So I didn't do all the iteration stuff on this downward move, but this is an iterative move coming down. So each of these little platforms is going to be really significant. I'm not going to mark every single one of them off, but you could do that. So each of these little drop ledges, like 22.90, 24.50, I kind of have some of them marked off. 25. That was because they were already there for the most part. But each of those little drop-off ledges is going to be really significant. Once you find support on it, you should move and try to advance to the next one. So we just found support on 21.82, and that was right here, 21.85. That's that drop point here. Yeah, we already found that one. So, yeah, I don't know. It looks good. Should just stair step out rapidly. One of the things that bothers me about this is always the nature of the move being kind of slow and not knowing what that means for maybe the trajectory out. I don't know for sure, but typically it does follow pretty closely with the trajectory. So even though it doesn't look quite right, like you might think that this is really steep and this is really flat, it actually is following the trajectory quite well. So far. So pumping back up, frankly, now or later, it doesn't really matter. Sometime between now and Monday, pumping back up to these levels would put you right in line with that trajectory out. I will say, though, that sometimes that move can be a little bit delayed. And if that's the case, what you're doing is you'd look at last trajectory, like the steepest one. So let's say you triangulate this to a bottom, right? And you've got the trajectory here at 55 degrees in, 55 degrees out. Well, we've got the marker that goes to the last target. This final trajectory is 104, which is really steep. Don't ask me why this works, but it does work sometimes. I wish I could tell you exactly why. So if I take the last trajectory and I use that, this is kind of like the last, the steepest, I would say. So it's kind of like the last trajectory that could be used. And I already have it on the chart, but if you map that to the very end, this could tell you like how it could meet that trajectory at the last possible second. So what this would show you is that you really don't have to leave. I mean, that's what this looks like, is you really don't have to leave 22, excuse me, why is this 2290 so bold? It should be 20, I'm going to make this 2350. I don't remember what that's from. It would tell you that potentially this could wait. I mean, it's a little odd, but this could actually be a very last minute move Monday into Tuesday, going into next week through Wednesday. So that would just be a way of understanding, like, hey, the steepest trajectory could be matched honestly on the back end of that level. Like, it's kind of interesting too, because it's where that level starts dropping down, that level breaks out there, sort of like an inverse version of itself. And notice that it gets you to the same point. It's just math. It's not really complicated. It's just mathematical stuff. Makes sense when you stare at it for a minute. Because if you look at the triangles, it's like, oh yeah, that could be like kind of the last move here. So it makes sense to me. It also makes sense if you think about this in terms of like a trend. So and I'm trying not to add more stuff to this. We may have to bring this line back later. But if you look at this as like a trend, and you were to say, let's say this hits like the bottom, I don't know, Friday, and it hits here at 2250 or something, right? You should be able to take that trend and draw it up, and that parallel, in theory, gets you really close, if not right on. It may need to be even worse than that. And I don't think this is very reliable, but I'm going to try it anyways. So what's that value? This isn't going to work. It's too low. See, that doesn't work. It does work there if you drop it to the bottom. So maybe that's what I'm trying to do. As I was thinking, like, it should work. There should be a concise... Well, the way I did this is weird, though. I didn't go to, like, that wick. Whatever. So I'm not measuring the... I'm not measuring the angle of the thing correctly because I put this too high. And I'd have to adjust them all. I'm not going to do that. So you get the idea, though. It's like a parallelogram. So it is currently tracking pretty well with that. I mean, it looks like it's right on it there. Yeah, that's pretty solid. So we could see that as a strong possibility. It works. Too geometric for your blood? Oh well. Prefer to just keep it simpler. And just look at the levels. I guess what I'm trying to say is I think if you breach 2350, that's going to be that kind of a bigger stopping point here. I think if you breach 2350, that you're going to have a pretty sizable move almost all the way back to the top at 29. There's not a lot of major creeks except for right in the center. And this is like a 50-50 split there. So I would venture that that's even more likely given the fact that going from like 23 up to the top kind of gives you that nice split. That's where we said the early hook was possible. It makes sense. It's a little slow. That's the only thing I'm like kind of scratching my head about. It still looks really slow to me. And I would think these moves would be much faster, but maybe that's just not what we're doing. I've had to keep moving these over. Yeah. So I think so far so good. It looks good. I'm happy with that. Are you now, Booksy? Yep, I am. Yep. $22.90 is a point of resistance. Yeah, I marked it off. Maybe because we dropped off from that point, but I'm gonna leave 23.50 on. You don't have to feel like we're stuck in the range we are. You don't have to feel anything. It's okay though. The RSI is coming down. It's chopping down pretty low. It's giving us a lot of space. Be grateful that we're consolidating and not just dumping, you know? Like, I can't tell you how much I love the 6 minute because of how accurate it can be sometimes for these turnaround points. I've talked about this. And some of your guys are like, well, it's not that different on the 5 minute, Buxy. I know, but I like the 6 minute. I'm telling you, the fact that this is chopped back down to near 50 now is a very positive sign for us. That's a good thing. You now have a lot of headspace to make another move. MPW calls could have printed. Oh yeah, it's going. The diamond target is really high. I don't know if it's going to get there in one fell swoop. I can't answer that question. Usually the trajectory in and trajectory out match on diamonds, so that's a tougher one to do. I think that you have to go to like the middle, and that's tough. The way I did it best was kind of going to the center, like there. And that's typically what you see, like 56 degrees. This must be a steeper one that I have. So I'll just use this one. Yeah, it's already going that way. Guffaw? Yeah, I was like, what? Yep, there it is. I'm just kidding. I don't think you guys are actually like that, by the way. I think most of you are probably like me. You're like, yeah, so what, Booksy? Because that's what I'm like. I'm like, yep, there it is. That's the trajectory out. So in theory, I think this target's pretty high up, but doesn't really look like you necessarily get there till Wednesday. Just on the basis of trajectory alone, like you wouldn't necessarily expect it to get there that fast. Things can be different. It really looks like a diamond bottom on RSI too, super clear. I mean, I was trying to tell you guys, it's a good swing trade if you're just looking for something on the side. If you don't even if you don't want to trade this long term, it's a simple enough swing. I said, you know, if it comes back above this 480 mark, it should be a good place. And it's kind of just taken off, but I don't really feel like there's no cause for alarm. You know, I don't think it's just. I mean, I'd be happy. Don't get me wrong. I'd be happy if it just went. But on the whole, do I think it's going to do that? No, just based on the principle of a diamond, like it would get there fast, but it would take a few days. So there's time, and it's already like overcooked on the hour. I think it'll probably have some pullbacks, and then it'll continue. We may need to see this retest here. I'm not sure. It's hard to say. We may need it to come back to at least 481, and then probably see it kind of chop through this zone. This is the creek right there, that blue line. It's kind of like the next big one. So same deal. It's got some work to do. It may look a little more like that before it's all done. This is going to be a big deal, I think, this creek. It could actually take a little bit. It may abandon the trajectory for a minute and work out this range. It's definitely going to need to hit support at 5 because it lost it and it didn't really ever test it, so it's going to have to test support at 5. I think it'll push resistance here just a little bit on the way up, and then probably you'll have some checks here, and then it'll go again. It'll be like a bigger move on the other side. So there's still time if you wanted to trade it. Don't really care either way. I'm in it long, and I'm in it with long-term call options, so I don't think options I don't think options on MPW are the best. They're kind of messy and they don't really print very well. So maybe something super short term would print, but my long calls have not moved like at all. They've been pretty low consistently. I've been like dying. So I'm happy about that. It's allowed me to load up a lot, but I'm really waiting for, on MPW, I'm really waiting for that bigger push. Like this to me is just getting back to where it was, and then I think it's going to have to make that massive creek cross here. And I think once that happens, we're going to get a pretty concise. Damn, that's close. Sorry for cursing, but speaking of pivots, that marker that we got on August 8th is really close. I mean, it is August 8th. It was earnings, but they had originally they didn't release the earnings date. People thought it was maybe like the 13th. So it kind of hit early, which is interesting. And I'm looking at that like, man, was that just another pivot, you know? Is that what happened here? Like, it looks like it. It looks like a really, really strong pivot point right there. And that ends up being like a bottom, not a top, which is needlessly frustrating. But I gotta remember to like check this stuff out later. Dang. There's gotta be a way to like get that better, you know? You can always kind of do the basics, which is just trade the supports and resistances until it moves. I think this is all a kind of a retest of this entry support. And once it does that, it should advance back to the 555 area. And that to me, I don't know if I call it like an SOS so much as I guess it could be. I have to like just continue from there. Head up back to the top. I don't know. I'll worry about that tomorrow. Anyways, it looks fine. It's only up 5%. It's not a big deal. Definitely being pinned at 514. So just not allowing it to advance on AMC. Has the appearance of the cat ear. It's difficult to read it because it looks like it's barcoding. But if you look closely on the RSI, you can see it visually there. So it's struggling to kind of find its footing. Normally this turns into a little bit more like an S-curve before it's over. So I'd be curious if it has another kind of peak down. It's hard to see it on the price action. Price action looks completely flat. But the I think that RSI looks fairly easy to read. Yeah, maybe it gets back below. This is hard. It's kind of guesswork. All right, it should have a termination point that makes sense though. So where is it going? There's support there. That was checked. That's a little bit of a creek. I'm looking up, you can't see my eyeballs, but I'm looking up at what's going on above, like where did it reject? And it rejected here. And then I'm kind of observing that on the principle of like, where is that rejection, where's the support? I don't think it's necessarily an arc though, or like a downward move like that. It could just be, what I mean is like, I don't know if it's necessarily like a harsh line. I think it's more of like a curve because because all the trajectories were like flattening, so it doesn't really make sense to draw like straight across on any of them. The only thing I can think to do that's maybe helpful is do a 50-50 here. Yeah, it's roughly the same. You could flatten this curve out a bit. Okay, so assuming this is not just a shallow S-curve, it's a shallow S-curve. I'm thinking it doesn't go past 50 on the 6 minute. I think it'll hold 50 if it's shallow. If it's not shallow, I think we're going to try to come back down to like 40. I don't think we're going to go all the way down to the bottom. And it seems like this has been the level, because look at like lately when it's made these repeated moves, kind of keeps coming back to like that same spot. It's not completely oversold. So I'm thinking either, I know it's a little odd. I'm using RSI because the price action isn't matching what we're seeing on RSI. The price action is very, very, very flat. But the RSI is chopping down as if it's still going down, as if the price was dropping, right? That's what consolidation can do for you sometimes, which is great. So I'm seeing a very strong likelihood after building that out that this hits one of two spots. So if it's a shallow S-curve, I think it may need to have, I don't want to say it always has to have a final dip. Technically it came back to 51 or something like that, like 51.80. Maybe that's enough, but I would still think it'd be nice to see it kind of pop here and then go, or goes ahead and does a fuller S-curve down, in which case this would generate like a hook and then you get like a more severe drop. But this is the one that could result in sort of a really powerful whip around. Either one's fine, because I think in either case you could probably advance back above 518. I just don't know what's required, like volume-wise, of the operator. It's hard to say. Hard to say. So, man, we can measure moves and try to figure it out, but yeah, I guess if you wanted to. It's like roughly 3%, and this went from 32 to 75, so about half. So about 32 points for 3%. So in theory, if it ran back up, even just back to 73 or something, 52 to 72, that's 20 points. So the ratio is 3%. Yeah, I'm just going to estimate it. 3% over 30 equals something over 20. I guess it would just be 2%. I mean, it's that simple. So I'm like trying to make it hard. It's not hard. It's like, because it's like a 1 to 10 ratio, I guess. So if it ran right now, it could go back to being 70 and it could get up to 522. That's exactly 2%. It's on my chart right now. So as it's been going, if it just if it only went up to 7.2 as well, I mean, I'm kind of looking at this like almost as conservatively as I can. If it only went to 72 on RSI and didn't go any higher, that could be as much as a 2% move. I'm assuming a lot of things there, but I'm just assuming that the volume ratio is about the same. Yeah, that could result in a move right up to 522. So I think it's possible. I suppose it'll just depend on what
what the operator wants to do. If they want to push it farther than that, they probably will want to drop this. If they want it to push higher, I think that's high enough. I mean, I had it drawn that way because I thought it would come underneath 521 first and then break out. It just has to get above this trend first. I know that the math is not perfect. You guys that are out there, you're probably thinking like, that's not how it works, Booksy. I know, but I'm just saying it's got enough to do it right now. So, oh, it pushed to 515 for a second. Go do what you need to do. I know, right? You really want me to leave so it'll run. You're probably right. I'm sure if I leave, it's gonna pump. Well, it's either starting to run or that's a head fake in order to drop it lower. I don't really care either way at this point, because if it drops lower, it's not like a huge deal. I think it would probably come back down again to near 509. But if it's breaking out, then I think it's got enough to drive it easily to 522 or more. It just depends how quickly it moves, I suppose. A slightly slower move here would actually probably benefit us in terms of like momentum, keeping the momentum. Slightly slower would be good. Anyways, that's a kind of a fun little exercise. It's just ratios. I don't know if it's going to pan out. These ratios would change all the time, relative strength index, because it just depends on how many buyers and sellers there are. And certain levels will have more than others, right? So it's kind of a tricky one to sort of assume that it's going to be exactly the same it's not going to be exactly the same every time. But I was just doing like a basic ratio. And I think based on where we were a second ago, if it did manage to go from here, I think we could get all the way up to 522 comfortably. Man, I can't wait for fall. Cooler weather. Yeah, looking kind of rough right now in GME. And right back down to 512. So it looks like they're using that as a head fake. And it didn't even go on that updated time frame. It just dropped. So they used it to drive the price. They're using it to drive the price lower, which makes sense. That was my first instinct was it was probably gonna have another drop, not just pop. But that's a good thing, because if they stop even in the midst of this area here anywhere, we could potentially have a really stronger reversal. Just micro levels. Yep. All right. It's 11 o'clock my time. This is a difficult one for today because, yeah. Yep. But it's kind of like the others. We keep running up into these markers and then dying out. So I'm not really sure yet. This is exactly what happened last time, if you recall. It was like it would run up and all of a sudden it seemed like it's going to go towards the marker and then it just dies out. This is a little different because we're above the creek. It's a little different because we really don't need to do a lot here to have a good support. It's hard to tell if this is going to be a UTAD kind of thing, which is why I'm sort of hesitant. But it just doesn't, we just don't want it to go below like 505 basically. And And it just depends on how long it takes to get there, because if it takes longer, it could come pretty low. But for now, like I would say, just a heads up, like if it just suddenly dropped through 505, it could be very bad. So I'm just saying it so you know. But this was a retest down here on the 4-hour 180. So it may seem like nothing's happening, but what we've done is a double flush here at the end of a wedge. It's a rising triangle, ascending triangle. We did a double flush. It dropped it back down to the 4-hour. It hit the low. It pushed all the way back up. And in doing so, it's presenting itself as a bit of a enigma, because you're like, well, it could be a hook and a UTAD. It's coming back to the top. And it's also not yet broken back out among that lower trend that the ascending triangle had. It's still below that. But in doing that double flush, it's checked the 4-hour and it's come back above the main creek down, which is very significant. That's a huge deal. So holding this level right now, it may seem really boring and like you're pulling hairs. I agree. I do not disagree. I think the volume control this week has been astronomically obnoxious, and I think it's not been very fun to watch, and I think it's been painful for people who are in options, who are wanting to see it run. I get all that. But in terms of like what's going on with the price action, a few pennies here, a few pennies there, it makes a big difference right now. It really does. So coming back above like 516, driving it to 520s, holding support up there is a game changer, right? Driving the price back below 506, dropping below there and holding resistance there is a game changer. Like those are things that could drastically change the price action. Now, has it been kind of the same every day? Yeah, kind of. But up until yesterday, Wednesday the 14th, we were not over that bigger creek. So driving the price to that 516 on Monday doesn't break the creek. Does that make sense? It didn't do anything. It may have raised it like a little bit, but it didn't break it. It just tested resistance. This is different. We're in a territory now where you're now outside. So those moves earlier, moving down to, even yesterday, moving down to the lows here at 5 could have been bad, but really like you still haven't jumped that creek yet. We pushed it and fell back through it. That was significant, but we haven't had an second attempt at all. In this case, we're now outside of both. Does that make sense? We're on the other side of the cross. That's all I'm trying to say. So it's significant. This may seem like, again, we're pulling hairs here, but I'm hesitant to say it, but I'm going to say it. I'm thinking we're like really, really close. Stones throw away, like we're splitting hairs now. We're very, very close to like a massive move one way or the other. And I would not be surprised if it stayed pinned, but I also think that it's kind of like in a place right now where just a little bit either way could really make a huge difference. So I've contested that I think that the iterations did in fact end on the 9th, which is a week ago, which is crazy. So I've been of the opinion that most of this has been kind of a show. Like we could have done the same moves here that we're doing here. And I think it would have been just as successful and blah, 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 blah. But I'm not the one running the stock. I'm not an operator. I don't have millions and millions of dollars. So I'm not going to be the one to decide if we chug sideways on low volume for 3 days. I think we got the news that we needed. I think the rate cuts are a given. And I think it makes sense to me that could be priced in. And so even though folks are expecting it to run maybe in September, I really don't see any problem with running up now into September. And really that price cut to me could just be priced in. I mean, it's not unusual for the market to do stuff like that. So GME looks a little healthier today. I've got to say, it just has that really nice vibe of like coming up, checking that support at 22.31. I readjusted this a couple times. This confirmation marker has been the same in terms of the level, but my little doodle here has been different. So I had it coming up like here earlier and then coming back down. And I mentioned that it doesn't really matter when it does that, it just probably would be very beneficial to do that. I mean, it would be beneficial to do that. So this is a very important level at 2232. It's the test level, and we need to make sure that we're strong above it. So did it have a confirmation above it today? I think so, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility at all that between now and even the end of the week that we could revisit that area. The only thing I'm concerned about with the UTAD kind of stuff here is just falling back through 2230. It's easier on GME at this point because it's horizontal. So yeah, super simple. IWM 2260, 2248 was my first breakout target, and then the second one is 215. I'm not saying 2248. I meant 212.48. And then 215 is the breakout target for that bottom ascending triangle. So we may get that push. It looks like it's trying. This is, like I said, a natural stopping place, but this is kind of like a midline for a lot of things. It's an arc. It's the S-curve, so you could easily see it whipping around that. It's also this red line coming up comes from a year ago. There's a trend that was built out that the SOS actually wrapped around, and we're still wrapping around it. And it's this red line going up. And all of that intersects right there at like 212.50, which is pretty much where my first price target was anyways. Just like GME and AMC, it's in a risk zone right now because it has to prove that there's going to be a support. So support could be as low as 207 here. If you built out support above, it'd have to be at like 212. That's the only other level I can see that would make any sense. And then all of these other ones as tops really haven't been checked. So we could still be in for quite a bit of chop here on IWM in the days and weeks to come. I'm not going to talk very much about MPW, but I just want to say, like, it's got a diamond bottom. The break target for that is 555, and it probably wouldn't get there until Wednesday next week, most likely. But it is there. So it looks solid right now. It did break out. Seems like it's trying to SOS. It needs to find support at 480, I would say. It can come below that and chop around it, but at the end of the day, it has to kind of garner that support there. So if it went through it, I would look for like a whipsaw effect around that marker, and it needs to hold. If it does not and it rejects off 482, you could likely see a lot of downside. So it needs to kind of eventually hold that as a support. And then coming back around the horn to AMC, because we're seeing a little drop here and people panicky when it drops. I think that this is fine. I know it doesn't feel good. I don't like that it had that up thrust first, because that does make it look very distributive as a range. And then you would have to say, well, where is it going to go? Well, it'd probably go below the range bottom, right? Wherever that is, which could be around 511. And it already did. It came through 510. So it makes sense to me that they did that because the price wasn't really moving. It was like stagnating. And RSI needs the shakedown. It needs to be reset. On the 6-minute time frame, I estimated that this is a possibility right around 47, 42. To me, it looks like it's already hitting that point. So maybe it's going to go ahead and go lower. But realistically, it doesn't need to come very far below like 40. Lately on all these swings, it's been finding a lot of ground on 40. So it doesn't need a full reset. I think it can manage at 40. And then I honestly think at that point, we got plenty of space. So that pullback could be very, very beneficial for us. We would be talking about like a 50-50 swing up here potentially. And that's good. I just got to make sure it doesn't come back beneath that like 505 area. Yeah, I could see this as a really powerful 525 S-curve if it can manage to hold support. I think it's got plenty of ammunition now, plenty of space to move. And those short-term indicators aren't the best for a lot of things once you get the markup going, but in a range, they're really helpful for seeing whether or not it needs to cool off. And it hit high early this morning. It's already cooled below 50, and it hasn't moved but a few pennies. So don't look at it as a negative that we're not just driving the price down. Look at it as a positive that we managed to drive the price low. Yeah, we checked it and we're rebounding, but I wouldn't say it's over yet. Just be patient. You have to get back above that. But just be confident about that, because the 510 check happened early this morning. The 509 happened. Another 510 check with a cool off RSI is a very, very big positive for us, is that gives us a lot of space to the upside. So I'm going to peace out. And I think if the stock runs, the stock runs. I probably will not be back today. I'm getting kind of burned out on the sideways. If it runs and it's explosive and I come back, there'll be 300 people in here just asking me where it's going to stop. I'll tell you right now, like, there's a pretty decent chance that because the RSI is pretty chilled out, that it could get to like 522, 525 on a push. I've got targets that go really high, and I'm going to stick with them. I think we're going to see this as a whip around as well. So I think we're going to see it find support around 521, and then we're basically going to whip around 544 and come up to 567. Why do I think that? Did I just draw those because they match the 50-50? No. Those are the little cliff levels that they made. They built it out to be a 50-50 around 521. Up again to the top. It's a ladder effect. It's a slingshot effect. So at the end of the day, at the end of the week, genuinely, I think if we break out today, I don't really think Friday is going to get pinned. I think we're going to end up around 550s on Friday, or maybe even higher. Because I think this will be a very fast move. There's not really anything else to look at except that check at 544. So fingers crossed. Maybe we can get stopped at 544. That's about the only place I can see us getting like really checked. This 520 area is just a localized breakout target. Just break and then retest at 517, and then you could just go. So there'd be like a lot of people that would be really like, oh my gosh, how far are we going to go? You guys already know my TA. You've been with me for weeks. If it breaks out here, you should be very happy and very bullish, and I would be very happy and very bullish. And I think it could go up to ultimately really, really high highs, but it has to make the right steps first. And this is a good first leg here, up to like the 560, 570 area. So yeah. So I'm happy with this price action. I know it stinks to have it chop, but I'd rather be chopping and letting the RSI cool off than dumping, for the same effect. I think it's gearing up, and I think that's a good sign. And I'm happy that it tried to make another dive for a low here in some ways. I think if we can manage to successfully go low to 510 or maybe back to like 508 or something like that, and we can find that support, we'd be in really good shape. I just don't want it to go below that creek again. So there is a fine line between, hey, that's healthy, that's good, and that's not good. And it's pennies, man. It's pennies right now. Feels like a penny stock. It's pennies right now. It's just the way it is. I can't change that. I wish I could, because it's been really annoying and not very fun to watch, but that's just it. It's the difference between like a few pennies at this point. And it's been very controlled. So in terms of like how far we've gone and all those moves. So yeah. I'm reading through the comments. Yeah, 1380s to 1475, still very possible. We'll have to wait till we get there. It might be a little bit lower now, but it wouldn't be like significantly lower at this point. It also just depends. I mean, if I did a modeled breakout that was very slow based on what we were seeing with the iteration moves, and if it goes that slow, then you're in a danger zone of really not running very far until September, and that changes the price target really dramatically because you don't need to go nearly as high to get the creek. It doesn't really make sense to me to do that because you've been accumulating in some ways longer here than you were in May, and it's like, why would you do that in order to? And maybe part of it's just the fact that there'd be a lot more sellers this time if it ran up again. But yeah, I gotta go. I gotta do some other stuff today. I'm gonna eat my lunch and then work on another project. I will tell you this much: if we get a big move, I will come back and just review it. But I'm not gonna do anything like long-winded this afternoon. I might come back for the last 45 minutes or something and just talk about it, just review it. But so far, just everything I've said is pretty much the good summary. I don't feel like there's anything else that needs to be said. And I don't really want to sit here like I already have for like 3 hours and just watch it chop sideways. So best of luck to you guys. Hope you're making some money on the trades. Good opportunities all across the market all the time. So just keep your eyes and ears open. I know I didn't get to the extra stuff. People were asking me about it, and they said if there was chop, and I just thought about it and forgot. So I apologize, but maybe later, if we have some time, I can check out some others. But I'm not going to do that right now. I need to go. So we'll see y'all later, and we'll talk to you later.